Hello, my friends. It's Indiana Holmes for another episode of Story Time. And tonight we continue with our book, Treasure Island. We begin with Chapter 10, The Voyage. All that night we were in a great bustle getting things stowed in their place, and boatfuls of Squire's friends, Mr. Blandley and the like, coming off to wish him a good voyage and a safe return. We never had a night at the Admiral Benbow when had half the work, and I was dog-tired when, a little before dawn, the boatswain sounded his pipe, and the crew began to man the capstan bars. I might have been twice as weary, yet I would not have left the deck. All was so new and interesting to me. The brief commands, the shrill note of the whistle, the men bustling to their places in the glimmer of ship's lanterns. "Now, barbecue, tip us to a stave," cried one voice. "The old one," cried another. "Aye, aye, mates," said Long John, who was standing by with his crutch under his arm, at once broke out in the air, and the words I knew so well, 15 men on a dead man's chest," and then the whole crew bore chorus, yo ho, and a bottle of rum. And at the third ho, drove the bars before them with a will. Even at the exciting moment it carried me back to an old Admiral Benbow in a second, and I seemed to hear the voice of the captain piping in the chorus. But soon the anchor was short up. Soon it was hanging, dripping at the bows. Soon the sails began to draw, and the land and the shipping to flit by on either side. And before I could lie down to snatch an hour of slumber, the Hispaniola had begun her voyage to the Isle of Treasure. I am not going to relate that voyage in detail. It was fairly prosperous. The ship proved to be a good ship. The crew were capable men, and the captain thoroughly understood his business. But before we came the length of Treasure Island, 2 or 3 things had happened which required to be known. Mr. Arrow, first of all, turned out even worse than the captain had feared. He had no command among the men, and people did what they pleased with him. But that was by no means the worst of it, for after a day or 2 at sea he began to appear on the deck with hazy eye, red cheek, stuttering tongue, and other marks of drunkenness. Time after time he was ordered below in disgrace. Sometimes he fell and cut himself. Sometimes he lay all day long in his little bunk at one side of the companion. Sometimes for a day or 2 he would be almost sober and attend to his work, at least passably. In the meantime, he could never make out where he got drunk. That was the ship's mystery. Watch him as we pleased, we could do nothing to solve it. And when we asked him to his face, he would only laugh if he were drunk, and if he were sober, deny solemnly that he ever tasted anything but water. He was not only useless as an officer, and a bad influence amongst the men, but it was plain that at this rate he must soon kill himself outright. So nobody was much surprised, nor very sorry, when one dark night, with a head sea, he disappeared entirely, and was seen no more. "Overboard," said the captain. "Well, gentlemen, that saves the trouble of putting him in irons." And there we were, without a mate, and it was necessary, of course, to advance one of the men. The boatswain, Job Anderson, was like the likeliest man aboard, and though he kept his old title, he served in a way as mate. Mr. Trelawney had followed the sea, and his knowledge made him very useful, for he often took a watch himself in an easy weather. And the coxswain, Israel Hands, was a careful, wily old experienced seaman who could be trusted at a pinch with almost anything. He was a great confidant of Long John Silver, and so the mention of his name leads me to speak of our ship's cook, Barbecue, as the men called him. Aboard the ship he carried his crutch by a lanyard around his neck, to have both hands free as possible. It was something to see him wedge the foot of the crutch against the bulkhead, and propped against it, yielding to every movement of the ship, get on with his cooking like someone safe ashore. Still more strange was it to see him in the heaviest of weather cross the deck. He had a line or two rigged up just to help him across the widest spaces. Long John's earrings, they were called. And he would hand himself from one place to another, now using the crutch, now trailing it alongside by the lanyard, as quickly as another man could walk. Yet some of the men who had sailed with him before expressed their pity to see him so reduced. "He's no common man, Barbecue," said the coxswain to me. "He had good schooling in his young days, and can speak like a book when so minded, and brave, a lion's nothing alongside Long John. I seen him grapple 4 and knock their heads together, him unarmed." All the crew respected and even obeyed him. He had a way of talking to each and doing everybody some particular service. To me, he was unweariedly kind, and always glad to see me in the galley, which he kept as clean as a new pin, the dishes hanging up burnished, and his parrot in a cage in one corner. "Come away, Hawkins," he would say. "Come and have a yarn with John. Nobody more welcome than yourself, my son. Sit you down and hear the news. Here's Captain Flint. I calls my parrot Captain Flint, after the famous buccaneer. Here's Captain Flint predicting success to our voyage. Wasn't you, Captain?" The parrot would say with great rapidity, "Pieces of 8, pieces of 8, pieces of 8, till you wondered that it was not our breath, or till John threw his handkerchief over the cage. "Now that bird," he would say, "is maybe 200 years old, Hawkins. They live forever mostly, and if anybody's seen more wickedness, it must be the devil himself. She sailed with England, and the great Captain England the pirate. She's been at Madagascar and at Malabar and Suriname, and Providence and Portobello. She was at the fishing up of the wrecked plate ships. It's there she learned pieces of 8. And little wonder, 350,000 of 'em, Hawkins. She was at the boarding of the Viceroy of the Indies out of Goa. She was, and to look at her, you would think she was a baby. But you smelt powder, didn't you, Captain? Stand by to go aboard," the parrot would scream. "Aye, she's a handsome craft, she is," the cook would say, and give her sugar from his pocket. And then the bird would peck at the bars and swear straight on, passing belief for wickedness. "There," John would add, "you can't touch pitch and not be mucked, lad. Here's the poor old innocent bird, oh mine swearing blue fire, and none the wiser, you may lay to that." She would swear the same, in a manner of speaking before chaplain. And John would touch his forehead with a solemn way that had made me think he was the best of the men. In the meantime, the squire and Captain Smollett were still on pretty distant terms with one another. The squire made no bones about the matter. He despised the captain. The captain, on his part, never spoke but when he was spoken to, and then sharp and short and dry, and not a word wasted. He owned, when driven into a corner, that he seemed to have been wrong about the crew, that some of them were as brisk as he wanted to see, and all had behaved fairly well. As for the ship, he had taken downright fancy to her. "She'll lie a point nearer the wind than a man has a right to expect of his married wife, sir. But," he would add, "all I say is, we're not home again, and I don't like the cruise." The squire at this would turn away and march up and down the deck, chin in air. "A trifle more of that man," he would say, "and I shall explode." He had some heavy weather, which only proved the quality of the Hispaniola. Every man on board seemed content, and they must have been hard to please if they had been otherwise, for it is my belief there was never a ship's company so spoiled since Noah put to sea. Double grog was going on the least excuse. There was duff on odd days, as for instance, if the squire heard it was any man's birthday, and always a barrel of apples standing broached in the waist for anyone to help himself that had a fancy. "Never knew good come of it yet," the captain said to Dr. Livesey. "Spoil forecastle hands, make devils. That's my belief." But good did come of the apple barrel, as you shall hear, for it had not been for that, we should have all had no note of warning, and might have also perished by the hand of treachery. This was how it came about. We had run up the trades to get wind of the island we were after. I'm not allowed to be more plain. And now we were running down for it with bright a lookout day and night. It was about last days of our outward voyage by the largest computation. Sometime that night, or at latest, before noon or morrow, we should sight Treasure Island. We were heading south-southwest and had a steady breeze abeam and a quiet sea. The Hispaniola rolled steadily, dipping her bowsprit now and then with a whiff of spray. All was drawing alow and aloft. Everyone was in the bravest spirits because we were now so in end of the first part of our adventure. Now, just after sundown, when all my work was over and I was on my way to my berth, it occurred to me I should like an apple. I ran on deck. The watch was all forward looking out for the island. The man at the helm was watching the luff of the sail and whistling away gently to himself. And at that was the sound excepting the swish of the sea against the bows and around the sides of the ship. In I got bodily into the apple barrel and found there was scarce an apple left. But sitting down there in the dark, what with the sound of the waters and the rocking movement of the ship, I had either fallen asleep or was on the point of doing so when a heavy man sat down with rather a clash close by. The barrel shook as he leaned his shoulders against it, and I was just about to jump up when the man began to speak. It was Silver's voice, and before I had heard a dozen words, I would not have shown myself for all the world, but lay there, trembling and listening in the extreme of fear and curiosity. From these dozen words, I understood the lives of all the honest men aboard depended upon me and me alone. Chapter 11. What I heard in the barrel. No, not I, said Silver. Flint was captain. I was quartermaster, along with my timber leg. The same broadside I lost my leg. Old Pew lost his deadlights. It was a master surgeon, him that amputated me out of the college and all, Latin by the bucket and what not. But he was hanged like a dog and sun-dried like the rest at Corso Castle. That was Robert's men. That was. They comed of changing names to their ships. Royal Fortune and so. Now, what a ship was christened, so let her stay, I says. So it was with the Cassandra, as brought us all safe home from Malzabar, after England took the Viceroy of the Indies. So it was with the old Walrus, Flint's old ship, as I've seen amuck with the red blood and fit to sink with gold. Ah, cried another voice, that of the youngest hand on board, and evidently full of admiration. He was the flower of the flock, was Flint. Davis was a man too, by all accounts, said Silver. I never sailed along of him. First with England, then with Flint. That's my story. And now, here on my own account, in a manner of speaking, I laid by 900 safe from England and 2,000 after Flint. They ain't bad for a man before the mast, all safe in a bank. 'Tain't earning now, it's saving does it. You may lay to that. Where's all England's men now? I dunno. Where's Flint's? Why, most of 'em on board here, and glad to get the duff. Been begging before that, some of 'em, old Pew, as had lost his sight, and might have thought shame, spends £1,200 in a year, like a lord in Parliament. Where is he now? Well, he's dead now, and under hatches. But for 2 years before that, shiver my timbers, the man was starving. He begged and he stole, and he cut throats, and he starved at that, by the powers. Well, it ain't much use after all, said the young seaman. 'Tain't much use for fools, you may lay to it. That nor nothing, cried Silver. But now, you look here, you're young, you are. But you're as smart as paint. I see that when I set my eyes on you, and I'll talk to you like a man. You may imagine how I felt when I heard this abominable old rogue addressing another in the very same words of flattery as he had used to myself. I think, if I had been able, that I would have killed him through the barrel. Meantime, he ran on, little supposing he was overheard. Here it is about gentlemen of fortune. They lives rough, and they risk swinging, but they eat and drink like fighting cocks. And when a cruise is done, why, it's hundreds of pounds instead of hundreds of farthings in their pockets. Now the most goes for rum, and a good thing, and a good fling too, and to sea again in their shirts. But that's not the course I lay. I puts it all away, some here, some there, and none too much anywheres, by reason of suspicion. I'm 50, mark you. Once back from this cruise, I set up gentlemen in earnest. Time enough too, says you. Ah, but I've lived easy in the meantime, never denied myself, nothing heart's desires, and slept soft and ate dainty all my days. But when at sea, and how did I begin? Before the mast, like you. Well, said the other, but all the other money's gone now, ain't it? You daren't show face in Bristol after this. Why, where might you suppose it was? Asked Silver derisively. At Bristol, in banks and places, answered his companion. It were, said the cook. It were when we weighed anchor, but my old missus has it all by now, and the spyglass is sold, lease and goodwill and rigging, and the old girl's off to meet me. I would tell you where, for I trust you, but it'd make jealousy among the other mates. And you can trust your missus? Asked the other. Gentlemen of fortune, returned the cook, usually trusts little among themselves, and right they are. You may lay to it, but I have a way with me, I have. When a mate brings me a slip on his cable, one as knows me, I mean, it won't be in the same world with old John. There was some of that was feared of Pew, and some that was feared of Flint, but Flint his own self was feared of me, feared he was, and proud. They was the roughest crew afloat, was Flint's. The devil himself would have been feared to go to sea with them. Well, now, I tell you, I'm not a boasting man, and you see for yourself how easy I keep company. But when I was quartermaster, lambs wasn't the word for Flint's old buccaneers. Ah, you may be sure of yourself in old John's ship. Well, I tell you now, replied the lad, I didn't half-quarter like the job till I had this talk with you, John, but there's my hand on it now. And a brave lad you were, and smart, too, answered Silver, shaking hands so heartily that all the barrels shook, and a finer figurehead for a gentleman of fortune I never clapped my eyes on. By this time I had begun to understand the meaning of their terms. By a gentleman of fortune, they plainly meant neither more nor less than a common pirate. And the little scene that I had overheard was the last act of the corruption of one of the honest hands, perhaps of the last one left aboard. But on this point I was soon to be relieved, for Silver, giving a little whistle, a third man strolled up and sat down by the party. Dick's square, said Silver. Oh, I'd know Dick was square, returned the voice of the coxswain Israel Hands. He's no fool, is Dick. And he turned his quid and spat. But look here, he went on, here's what I want to know. Barbecue. How long are we going to stand off and on like a blessed bumboat? I've had a'most enough of Captain Smollett. He's hazed me long enough. By thunder, I want to go into that cabin, I do. I want their pickles and wines and that. Israel said, Silver, your head ain't much account, nor ever was, but you're able to hear, I reckon. Leastways your ears is big enough. Now here's what I say. You'll berth forward, and you'll live hard, and you'll speak soft, and you'll keep sober till I give the word, and you may lay to that, my son. Well, I don't say no, do I? Growled the coxswain. What I say is when. That's what I say. When, by the powers, cried Silver. Well, now, if you want to know, I'll tell you when. The last moment I can manage, that's when. Here's a first-rate seaman, Captain Smollett, sails the best ship for us. He's this squire and doctor with a map and such. I don't know where it is, do I? No more do you, says you. Well then, I mean this squire and doctor shall find the stuff and help us get it aboard by the powers. Then we'll see. If I was sure of you all, sons of double Dutchmen, I'd have Captain Smollett navigate us halfway back again before I struck. Why, we're all seamen aboard here, I should think, said the lad Dick. We're all forecastle hands, you mean, snapped Silver. We can steer a course, but who's to set one? That's what all you gentlemen split on, first and last. If I had my way, I'd have Captain Smollett work us back into the trades at least. Then we'd have no blessed miscalculations and a spoonful of water at a day. But I know the sort you are. I'll finish 'em at the island as soon as the blunt's on board, and a pity it is. But you're never happy till you're drunk. Split my sides, I've a sick heart to sail with the likes of you. Easy all, Long John, cried Israel. Who's a cousin of you? Why, how many tall ships, think ye, now have I seen laid aboard, and how many brisk lads drying in the sun at Execution Dock, cried Silver, and all for this same hurry and hurry and hurry. You hear me? I seen a thing or two at sea, I have. If you would only lay your course, and a pint to windward, you wouldn't ride in carriages, would you? But not you. I know you. You'll have your mouth full of rum tomorrow, and go hang. Everybody knowed you as a kind of Chaplain John, but there's others as could hand and steer as well as you, said Israel. They'd liked a bit o' fun, they did. They wasn't so high and dry nohow, but took their fling like jolly companions, every one. So, says Silver, well, and where are they now? Pew was that sort, and he died a beggar man. Flint was, and he died of rum at Savannah. Ah, they was sweet crew, they was, only where are they? But, asked Dick, when we do lay 'em athwart, what are we to do with 'em, anyhow? There's the man for me, cried the cook admiringly. That's what I call business. Well, what would you think? Put 'em ashore like maroons? That would have been England's way. Or cut 'em down like that much pork? That would have been Flint's or Billy Bones. Billy was the man for that, said Israel. Dead men don't bite, says he. Well, he's dead now hisself. He knows the long and the short of it now. And if ever a rough hand come to port, it was Billy. Right you are, said Silver, rough and ready. But mark you here, I am an easy man. I am quite the gentleman, says you. But this time it's serious. Duty is duty, mates. I give my vote. Death. When I'm in Parliament and riding in my coach, I don't want none of these sea lawyers in their cabin a-coming home, unlooked for, like the devil at prayers. Wait, is what I say, but when the time comes, why, let her rip. John, cries the coxswain, you're a man. Well, say so, Israel, when you see, said Silver. Only one thing I claim. I claim Trelawney. I'll wring his calf's head off his body with these hands, Dick, he added, breaking off. You just jump up like a sweet lad and get me an apple to wet my pipe like. You may fancy the terror I was in. I should have leaped out and run for it if I had found the strength, but my limbs and heart alike misgave me. I heard Dick begin to rise and then someone seemingly stopped him, and the voice of Hans exclaimed, "Oh, stow that. Don't you get suckling on that bilge, John. Let's have a go of the rum." "Dick," said Silver, "I trust you. I've a gauge on the keg, mind. There's a key. You fill a pankin, and I'll bring it up." Terrified as I was, I could not help thinking to myself that this must have been how Mr. Arrow got the strong waters that destroyed him. Dick was gone but a little while, and during his absence Israel spoke straight on the cook's ear. It was but a word or two that I could catch, and yet I gathered some important news. For besides other scraps that tended to the same purpose, this whole clause was audible. "Not another man of them'll gin." Hence there was still faithful men on board. When Dick returned, one after another of the trio took the pannikin and drank. One to luck, another to a "here's to old Flint," and Silver himself sang in a kind of song, "Here's to ourselves and hold your luff, plenty of prizes and plenty of duff." Just then a sort of brightness fell upon me in the barrel, and looking up, I found the moon had risen and was silvering the mizzen top, the shining white on the luff of the foresail, and almost at the same time the voice of the lookout shouted, "Land ho!" Chapter 12. Council of War. There was a great rush of feet across the deck. I could hear people tumbling up from the cabin and the forecastle and slipping in an instant outside my barrel. I dived behind the foresail and made double towards the stern and came out upon the open deck in time to join Hunter and Dr. Livesey in the rush for the weather bow. There all hands were already congregated. A belt of fog lifted almost simultaneously with the appearance of the moon. Away to the southwest of us, we saw two low hills, about a couple of miles apart, and rising behind one of them, a third and higher hill, whose peak was still buried in the fog. All three seemed sharp and conical in figure. So much I saw almost in a dream, for I had not yet recovered from what my horrid fear of a minute or two before. And then I heard the voice of Captain Smollett issuing orders. The Hispaniola was laid a couple of points nearer the wind and now sailed at a course that would just clear the island on the east. "And now, men," said the captain, when all was sheeted home, "has any one of you ever seen that land ahead?" "I have, sir," said Silver. "I've watered there with a trader I was cooking." "The anchorage is on the south, behind the inlet, I fancy?" asked the captain. "Yes, sir. Skeleton Island, they calls it. It were the main place for pirates once, and a hand we had on board knowed all the names for it. That hill to the nord, they call it Fortemast Hill. There are 3 hills in a row, running southward, fore, main, and mizzen, sir. But the main, that's the big 'un, with the cloud on it. They usually calls it Spyglass, by reason of a lookout they kept there when they was in anchorage cleaning, for it's there they clean their ships, sir, asking your pardon." "I have a chart here," says Captain Smollett. "See if that's the place." Long John's eyes burned in his head as he took the chart, but by the fresh look of the paper, I knew he was doomed to disappoint. This was not the map we found in Billy Bones' chest, but an accurate copy, complete in all things, names, heights, surroundings, with the single exception of the red cross and the written notes, which were missing. Sharp as must have been his annoyance, Silver had the strength of mind to hide it. "Yes, sir," said he, "this is the spot, to be sure, and very prettily drawn out. Who might have done that, I wonder? The pirates were too ignorant, I reckon. Aye, here it is, Captain Kidd's anchorage, just the name my shipmate called it. There's a strong current runs along the south and then away, nor'ard, up the west coast. Right you was, sir, says he, to haul your wind and keep the weather of the island, leastways, if such was your intention as to enter the careen, and there ain't no better place for that than these waters. Thank you, my man, says Captain Smollett. I'll ask you later on to give us a help. You may go. I was surprised at the coolness with which John avowed his knowledge of the island, and I own I was half frightened when I saw him drawing nearer to myself. He did not know, to be sure, that I had overheard his counsel from the apple barrel, and yet I had by this time taken such a horror of his cruelty, duplicity, and power that I could scarce conceal a shudder when he laid his hand upon my arm. Ah, says he, this here is a sweet spot. This island, a sweet spot for a lad to get ashore on. You'll bathe, and you'll climb trees, and you'll hunt goats, you will, and you'll get aloft on them hills like a goat yourself. Why, it makes me young again. I was going to forget my timber leg, I was. It's a pleasant thing to be young and have 10 toes, and you may lay to that. When you want to go a bit of exploring, you just ask old John. He'll put you up a snack for you to take along. And clapping me in the friendliest way upon the shoulder, he hobbled off forward and went below. Captain Smollett, the squire, and Dr. Livesey were talking together on the quarterdeck, and anxious as I was to tell them my story, I durst not interrupt them openly. While I was still casting about in my thoughts to find some probable excuse, Dr. Livesey called me to his side. He had left his pipe below, and being a slave to tobacco, had meant that I should fetch it. But as soon as I was near enough to speak, and not to be overheard, I broke immediately. Doctor, let me speak. Get the captain and the squire down to the cabin, and then make some pretense to send for me. I have terrible news. The doctor changed his countenance a little, but next moment he was master of himself. Thank you, Jim, said he quietly. That was all I wanted to know, as if he had asked me a question. And with that, turned on his heel and rejoined the other two. They spoke together for a little, and though none of them started or raised his voice, or so much as whistled, it was plain enough that Dr. Livesey had communicated my request, for the next thing that I heard was the captain giving an order to Job Anderson, and all hands were piped on deck. My lads, said Captain Smollett, I've a word to say to you. The island that we have sighted is the place we have been sailing for. Mr. Trelawney, being a very open-handed gentleman, as we all know, has just asked me a word or two. And as I was able to tell him that every man on board has done his duty, alow and aloft, as I never asked to see it done better, why, he and I and the doctor are going below to the cabin to drink to your health and luck, and you'll have grog served out for you to drink our health and luck. I'll tell you what I think of this. I think it's handsome, and if you think so too, you'll give a good sea cheer for the gentleman that does it. The cheer followed. That was a matter of course, but it rang out so full and hearty that I confess I could hardly believe these same men were plotting for our blood. One more cheer for Captain Smollett, cried Long John, when the first had subsided, and this also was given with a will. On top of that, the three gentlemen went below, and not long after, word was sent forward that Jim Hawkins was wanted in the cabin. I found them all three seated round the table, a bottle of Spanish wine and some raisins before them, and the doctor smoking away with his wig on his lap, and that, I knew, was a sign that he was agitated. The stern window was open, for it was a warm night, and you could see the moon shining behind the ship's wake. Now, Hawkins, said the squire, you have something to say? Speak up. I did as I was bid, and as short as I could make it, told the whole details of the Silvers' conversation. Nobody interrupted me till I was done, nor did any one of the three of them make so much as a movement, but they kept their eye upon my face from the first to the last. "Jim," said Dr. Livesey, "take a seat." And they made me sit down at the table beside them, poured me out a glass of wine, filled my hands with raisins, and all three, one of them after the other, and each with a bow, drank my good health, and their service to me, for my luck and courage. "Now, Captain," said the squire, "you were right, and I was wrong. I own myself an ass, and I await your orders." "No more an ass than I, sir," returned the captain. "I never heard of a crew that meant to mutiny but what showed signs before, for any man that had an eye in his head to see the mischief and take the steps according. But this crew," he added, "beats me." "Captain," said the doctor, "with your permission, that's Silver, a very remarkable man." "He'd look remarkably well from a yard arm, sir," returned the captain. "But this is talk. This don't lead to anything. I see 3 or 4 points, and with Mr. Trelawney's permission, I'll name them. You, sir, are the captain. It is for you to speak," says Mr. Trelawney grandly. "First point," began Mr. Smollett. "We must go on, because we can't turn back. If I gave the word to go about, they would rise at once. Second point, we have time before us, at least until this treasure's found. Third point, there are faithful hands. Now, sir, it's got to come to blows sooner or later, and what I propose is that it is to take time by the forelock, as that saying is, and come to blows some fine day when they least expect it. We can count it takes on your own home servants, Mr. Trelawney." "As upon myself," declared the squire. "3, reckoned the captain. "Ourselves make 7, counting Hawkins here. Now about honest hands." "Most likely Trelawney's own men," said the doctor. "Those he had picked up for himself before he lit on Silver." "Nay," replied the squire, "Hands was one of mine." "I did think I could have trusted Hands," added the captain. "And to think that they are all Englishmen," broke out the squire. "Sir, I could find it in my heart to blow the ship up." "Well, gentlemen," said the captain, "the best that I can say is not much. We must lay to, if you please, and keep a bright lookout. It's trying on a man, I know. It would be pleasanter to come to blows, but there's no help for it till we know our men. To lay to and whistle for a wind, that's my view. Jim here," said the doctor, "can help us more than anyone. The men are not shy with him, and Jim is a noticing lad. Hawkins, I put prodigious faith in you," added the squire. I began to feel pretty desperate at this, for I felt altogether helpless, and yet, by the odd train of circumstances, it was indeed through me that safety came. In the meantime, talk as we pleased, there were only 7 out of 26 on whom we knew we could rely, and out of these 7, 1 was a boy, so that the grown men on our side were 6 to their 19. Part 3, My Shore Adventure. Chapter 13, How My Shore Adventure Began. The appearance of the island when I came on deck next morning was altogether changed. Although the breeze had now utterly ceased, we had made a great deal of way during the night, and we were now lying becalmed about half a mile to the southeast of the low eastern coast. Gray-colored woods covered a large part of the surface. This even tint was indeed broken by the streaks of yellow and sandbrake in the lower lands, and by many tall trees of the pine family, outtopping the others, some singly, some in clumps, but the general coloring was uniform and sad. The hills ran up clear above the vegetation in the spires of naked rock. All were strangely shaped, and the spyglass, which was by 300 or 400 feet the tallest on the island, was likewise the strangest configuration. running up sheer from almost every side, and then suddenly cut off at the top like a pedestal to put a statue on. The Hispaniola was rolling scuppers under the ocean swell. The booms were tearing at the blocks, and the rudder was banging to and fro, and the whole ship creaking, groaning, and jumping like a malfactory. I had to cling tight to the backstay, and would turn giddily before my eyes, for though I was good enough sailor, when there was way on, this standing still and being rolled about like a bottle was a thing I never learned to stand without a qualm or so, above all in the morning and on an empty stomach. Perhaps it was this, perhaps it was the look of the island with its gray melancholy woods and wild stones and spires, and the surf that we could both see and hear foaming and thundering on the steep beach. At least, although the sun shone bright and hot, and the shorebirds were fishing and crying all around us, and you would have thought anyone would have been glad to get to the land after being so long at sea. My heart sank, as the saying is, into my boots. And from the first look onward, I hated the very thought of Treasure Island. We had a dreary morning's work before us, for there was no sign of any wind, and the boats had to be got out and manned, and the ship warped 3 or 4 around and corner of the island, and up the narrow passage to the haven behind Skeleton Island. I volunteered for one of the boats, where I had, of course, no business. The heat was sweltering, and the men grumbled fiercely over the work. Anderson was in command of my boat, and instead of keeping the crew in order, he grumbled as loud as the worst. "Well," he said with an oath, "it's not forever." I thought this was a very bad sign, for up to that day the men had gone briskly and willingly about their business, but the very sight of the island had relaxed the cords of discipline. All the way in, Long John stood by the steersman and conned the ship. He knew the passage like the palm of his hand, and though the man in the chains got everywhere more water than was down in the chart, John never hesitated once. "There's a strong scour with the ebb," he said, "and this here passage has been dug out, in a manner of speaking, with a spade." We brought up just where the anchor was in the chart, about 1/3 of a mile from each shore. The mainland, on the side of the Skeleton Island, was on the other. The bottom was clean sand. The plunge of our anchor sent up clouds of birds wheeling and crying over the woods, but in less than a minute they were down again, and all was once more silent. The place was entirely landlocked, buried in the woods, the trees coming right down to a high water mark, the shores mostly flat, and hilltops standing round at a distance in a sort of amphitheater, one where, one there. 2 little rivers, or rather 2 swamps, emptied out into this pond, as you might call it, and the foliage around that part of the shore was kind of poisonous brightness. From the ship we could see nothing of the house or stockade, for they were quite buried among the trees, and if it had not been for the chart on the companion, we might have been the first that had ever anchored there since the island arose out of the sea. There was not a breath of moving air, nor a sound but that of the surf booming half a mile away along the beaches and against the rocks outside. A peculiar stagnant smell over the anchorage, a smell of sodden leaves and rotting tree trunks. I observed the doctor sniffing and sniffing, like something or someone tasting a bad egg. "I don't know about treasure," he said, "but I'll strike my wig, there's fever here." In the conduct of the men, there had been an alarming in the boat. It became truly threatening when they had come aboard. They lay about the deck, growling to each other in talk. The slightest order was received with a black look and grudgingly and carelessly obeyed. Even the honest hands must have caught the infection, for there was not one man aboard to mend another. Mutiny, it was plain, hung over all of us like a thundercloud. And it was not only we of the cabin party who perceived the danger. Long John was hard at work, going from group to group, spending himself in good advice. And as for example, no man could have shown a better. He fairly outstripped himself in willingness and civility. He was all smiles to everyone. An order we were given, John would be on his crutch in an instant, with the cheeriest "Aye, aye, sir," in the world. And when there was nothing else to do, he kept up one song after another, as if to conceal the discontent of the rest. Of all the gloomy features of that gloomy afternoon, this obvious anxiety on the part of Long John appeared the worst. We held a council in the cabin, and said, "Sir," said the captain, "if I risk another order, the whole ship will come about our ears by the run. You'll see, sir, here it is. I get a rough answer. Do I not? Well, if I speak back, pikes will be going in two shakes. If I don't, Silver will see there's something under that, and the game's up. Now we've only one man to rely on." "And who's that?" asked the squire. "Silver, sir," returned the captain. He's as anxious as you are, and I to smother things up. This is a tiff. He'd soon talk him out of it if he had the chance. And what I propose is to give him the chance. Let's allow the men an afternoon ashore. If they all go, why, we'll fight the ship. If none of 'em go, well then, we hold the cabin. And God defend the right. If some go, you mark my word, sir, Silver will bring 'em aboard again, as mild as lambs." It was so decided. Loaded pistols were served out to all the sure men. Hunter, Joyce, Redruth were taken into our confidence, and received the news with less surprise and a better spirit than we had looked for. And then the captain went back on deck and addressed the crew. "My lads," said he, "we've had a bit of a hot day, and are all tired and all out of sorts. A turn ashore will hurt nobody, and the boats are still in the water. You can take the gigs, and as many as you please may go ashore for the afternoon. I'll fire a gun half an hour before sundown. I believe the silly fellows must have thought they would break their shins over treasure as soon as they were landed, for they all came out of their sulks for a moment and gave a cheer that started to echo in a faraway hill and sent birds at once more flying and squalling round the anchorage. The captain was too bright to be in that way. He whipped out of sight in a moment, leaving Silver to arrange the party, and I fancy it was as well as he did so. Had he been on deck, he could no longer so much have pretended not to understand the situation. It was as plain as day. Silver was the captain, and a mighty rebellious crew he had of it. The honest hands and I was soon to see it proved that there were such on board. Must have been very stupid fellows. Or rather, I suppose, the truth was this, that all hands were disaffected by the example of the ringleaders. Only some more and some less, and a few, being good fellows in the main, could neither be led nor driven any further. It is one thing to be idle and skulk, and quite another to take a ship and murder a number of innocent men. At last, however, the party was made up. 6 fellows were to stay aboard, and the remaining 13, including Silver, began to embark. Then it was that there came into my head the first of the mad notions that contributed so much to save our lives. If 6 men were left by Silver, it was plain our party could not take the fight and fight for the ship, and since only 6 were left, it was equally plain that the cabin party had no present need of my assistance. It occurred to me at once to go ashore. In a jiffy, I had slipped over the side and curled up in the foresheets of the nearest boat, and almost at the same moment she shoved off. No one took notice of me, only the bow oar saying, "Is that you, Jim? Keep your head down." But Silver, from the other boat, looked sharply over and called out to know if that were me, and from the moment I began to regret what I had done. The crews raced for the beach, but the boat I was in, having some start and being at once the lighter of the better manned, shot far ahead of the consort, and the bow had struck among the shore side of the trees, and I caught a branch and swung myself out and plunged into the nearest thicket, while Silver and the rest were still 100 yards behind me. "Jim, Jim!" I heard him shouting. But you may suppose I paid no heed. Jumping, ducking, and breaking through, I ran straight before my nose till I could run no longer. Chapter 14. The First Blow. I was so pleased at having given the slip to Long John that I began to enjoy myself and look around me with some interest on my strange land that I was now in. I had crossed a marshy tract full of willows, bulrushes, and odd outlandish swampy trees, and I had now come out upon the outskirts of an open piece of undulating sandy country about a mile long, dotted with a few pines and a great number of consorted and contorted trees, not unlike the oak in growth, but pale in the foliage, like willows. On the far side of the open stood one of the hills with 2 quaint, craggy, shining peaks, shining vividly in the sun. I now felt for the first time, the joy of exploration. The isle was uninhabited. My shipmates, I had left them behind, and nothing lived in front of me but dumb brutes and fowls. I turned hither and thither among the trees. Here and there were flowering plants unknown to me. Here and there I saw snakes, and one raised his head from the ledge of a rock and hissed at me with a noise not unlike that of a spinning of a top. Little did I suppose that he was deadly and an enemy. That noise was a famous rattle. Then I came to a long thicket of these oak-like trees, live or evergreen oaks. I heard afterwards they should be called, which grew long and grew along the sand and brambles. The boughs curiously twisted, the foliage compact like thatch. The thicket stretched down from the top of one of the sandy beaches and knolls, spreading and growing taller as it went, until it reached the margin of the broad, reedy fen, through which the nearest of the little rivers soaked its way into the anchorage. The marsh was steaming in the strong sun, and the outline of Spyglass trembled through the haze. All at once there began to go a sort of bustle among the bulrushes. A wild duck flew up with a quack. Another followed, and soon over the whole surface of the marsh a great cloud of birds hung screaming and circling in the air. I judged at once that some of my shipmates must be drawing near alongside the borders of the fen. Nor was I deceived, for soon the very distant and low tones of human voice, which, as I continued to give ear, grew steadily louder and nearer. This put me in great fear, and I crawled under covers of the nearest live oak and squatted there, hearkening, as silent as a mouse. Another voice answered, and then the first voice, which I now recognized to be Silver's, once more took up the story and ran on for a long while in a stream, only now and again interrupted by the other. By the sound, they must have been talking earnestly and almost fiercely, but no distinct word came into my hearing. At last the speakers seemed to have paused and perhaps to have sat down, for not only did they cease to draw any nearer, but the birds themselves began to grow more quiet and settle again in their places in the swamp. And now I began to feel that I was neglecting my business, that since I had been foolhardy as to come ashore with these desperadoes, the least I could do was to overhear their counsels, and that my plain and obvious duty was to draw as close as I could manage under the favorable ambush of the crouching trees. I could tell the direction of the speakers pretty exactly, not only by the sound of their voices, but by the behavior of the birds, and still hung in the alarm above the heads of the intruders. Crawling on all fours, I made steadily but slowly towards them, till at last, raising my head to an aperture among the leaves, I could see clear down into the little green dell beside the marsh, and closely set about the trees, where Long John Silver and another of the crew stood face to face in conversation. The sun beat full upon them. Silver had thrown his hat beside him on the ground, and his great smooth blond face, all shining with heat, had lifted to the other man's in a kind of appeal. "Mate," he was saying, "it's because I thinks gold dust of you. Gold dust, and you may lay to that. If I hadn't took to you like the pitch, do you think I'd have been here a warning of you? All's up. You can't make nor mend. It's to save your neck that I'm speaking. And if one of 'em's wild, ye knows it. Where you'd be, where I'd be. Tom, now tell me, where'd you be?" "Silver," said the other man, and I observed he was not only red in the face, but spoke as hoarse as a crow, and his voice shook too, like a taut rope. "Silver," says he, "you're old and you're honest, or has the same for it, and you've money too, which lots of poor sailors hasn't, and you're brave, or I'm mistook, and will tell me you'll meet yourself, be led away with that kind of mess of swabs, not you. As sure as God sees me, I'd sooner lose my hand if I'd turn again my duty." And then, all of a sudden, he was interrupted by a noise. I had found one of the honest hands. Well, here, at the same moment, came the news of another. Far away, out in the marsh, there arose, all of a sudden, a sound like a cry of anger, and then another on the back of it, and then one horrid long-drawn scream. The rocks of the spyglass re-echoed it a score of times. The whole troop of marsh birds rose again, darkening heaven with a simultaneous whir, and long after that death yell was still ringing in my brain. A death yell I cannot forget. Silence had reestablished its empire, and only the rustle of the rescinding birds and the boom of the distant surges disturbed the languor of the afternoon. Tom had leaped at the sound, like a horse at a spur, but Silver had not winked an eye. He stood where he was, resting slightly on his crutch, watching his companion like a snake about to spring. "John," said the sailor, stretching out his hand. "Hands off!" cried Silver, leaping back a yard, as it seemed to me, with the speed and security of a trained gymnast. "Hands off, if you like, John Silver," said the other. "It's a black conscience that can make you feared of me, but in heaven's name, tell me, what was that?" "That," returned Silver, smiling away, but warier than ever, his eye a mere pinpoint in his big face, but gleaming like a crumb of glass. "That? Oh, I reckon that'll be Allen." And at this point, Tom flashed out like a hero. "Allen!" he cried, then the rest of his soul for a true seaman. "And as for you, John Silver, long as you've been a mate of mine, you've been a mate of mine no more. If I die like a dog, I'll die in my duty." "You've killed Allen, have you?" Kill me too, if you can, but I defies you." And with that, this brave fellow turned his back directly on the cook and set off walking for the beach. But he was not destined to go far. With a cry, John seized the branch of the tree, whipped the crutch out from his armpit, and sent that uncouth missile hurtling through the air. It struck poor Tom, point foremost, with stunning violence, right between the shoulders in the middle of his back. His hands flew up. He gave a sort of gasp and fell. Whether he were injured much or little, none could ever tell. Like enough to judge from the sound, his back was broken on the spot. But he had no time given him to recover. Silver, agile as a monkey, even without a leg or a crutch, was on top of him next moment and had twice buried his knife up to the hilt in the defenseless body. From my place of ambush, I could hear him pant aloud as he struck the blows. I do not know what it rightly is to faint, but I do know that for the next little while the whole world swam around before me in a whirling mist. Silver and the birds and the tall spyglass hilltop going round and round and topsy-turvy before my eyes, and all manner of bells ringing and distant voices shouting in my ear. When I came again to myself, the monster had pulled himself together, his crutch under his arm, his hat upon his head. Just before him, Tom lay motionless upon the sward. But the murderer minded him not a whit, cleansing his blood-stained knife, and while a wisp of grass, everything else was unchanged. The sun still shining mercilessly on the steaming marsh and the tall pinnacle of the mountain. I could scarce persuade myself that the murder had been actually done, and a human life cruelly cut short a moment since before my eyes. But now John put his hand into his pocket, brought out a whistle, and blew it. Several modulated blasts that rang far across the heated air. I could not tell, of course, the meaning of the signal, but it instantly awoke my fears. More men would be coming. I might be discovered. They had already slain 2 of the honest people. After Tom and Allen, might not I come next? Instantly I began to extricate myself and crawl back again, with what speed and silence I could manage, to the more open portion of the wood. As I did so, I could hear hails coming and going between the old buccaneer and his comrades, and this sound of danger lent me wings. As soon as I was clear of the thicket, I ran as I never ran before, scarce minding the direction of my flight, so long as it led me from the murderers. And as I ran, fear grew upon me until it turned into a kind of frenzy. Indeed, could anyone be more entirely lost than I? When the gun fired, how should I dare to go down to the boats among these fiends, still smoking from their crime? Would not the first of them who saw me wring my neck like a snipe's? Would not my absence itself be evidence to them of my alarm, and therefore of my fatal knowledge? It was all over, I thought. Goodbye to the Hispaniola. Goodbye to the squire, the doctor, and the captain. There was nothing left for me but death by starvation or death by the hands of the mutineers. All this while, as I say, I was still running, and without talking or without taking any notice, I had drawn near to the foot of a little hill with 2 peaks, and had got into a part of the island where the live oaks grew more wildly apart and seemed more like forest trees in their bearing and dimensions. Mingled with these were a few scattered pines, some 50, some near 70 feet high, and air too smelt more freshly than down beside the marsh. And here a fresh alarm brought me to a standstill with a thumping heart. And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 14. It's getting very scary for old Hawkins, or very young Hawkins, I should say. And it's getting pretty dicey for the honest men on board the island and on board the ship. I'm excited to find out what happens next to young Hawkins and everyone else. Until tomorrow night, this has been Indiana Holmes. Love to you all. Good night.
Please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications button. Thank you very much.